Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the University of New South Wales and another one in the series of our inaugural professorial lectures. I've lost track of how many we've done now. It's somewhere around 15, I think, that we've had, and they've been terrifically successful. In welcoming you to the university, let me also acknowledge the Bejigal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which the university stands, and I would pay my respects to their elders past and present. As I said, terrific to have you here for another one of our inaugural professorial lectures. Today the lecture will be given by Professor Markus Groth from the School of Business. I would also like to add a very, very special welcome to members of Marcus's family. His wife Vanessa is here. His two sons, Lucas and Oliver. I think Oliver is nearly three. And Lucas is nearly 3. Oliver is just 1. So we're starting the recruitment drive very early at this university. But terrific to have you here and to be part of this ceremony. As I've mentioned before when I've introduced these lectures, it is something that we've only just started to do at the University of New South Wales. About halfway through this year, or a little bit earlier this year, we started to do these professorial inaugural lectures. They have been fantastically successful. They've come from people from all across the university, people who've either been promoted to the level of professor at the university or people that we have appointed at the level of professor, in order for them to give an inaugural lecture to tell people what they actually do. As I said, from all across the university, all the different disciplines that are represented. So my great pleasure to introduce Markus here this afternoon. Markus is a professor in the School of Management in the UNSW Business School. He got his undergraduate degree and his postgraduate degree at the University of Arizona. And as far as I can tell from his CV, I think he joined the university in 2001. Well, he joined the Australian Graduate School of Management, the AGSM, when it was still a joint venture between the University of Sydney and the University of New South Wales. So he was in that period where he was employed by both institutions. But of course that joint venture separated and AGSM came to the University of New South Wales. And with that, Markus joined the University of New South Wales proper. And since then, he's been here at the university. And he was promoted this year to a professor. His research specialty focuses on service management and the role of emotions in the workplace, specifically the link between employee experiences of work and service quality. And the service quality of the customers that they serve. His work has been published in leading management, psychology and marketing journals, such as the Academy of Management Journal, the Journal of Marketing, the Journal of Applied Psychology, Personnel Psychology, the Journal of Management, and the Academy of Management Executive. He's consulted widely, both privately, for private and public organisations on human resource management, and he's been awarded several large multi-year grants by the Australian Research Council to examine various facets of managing people in the workplace. Look, without further ado, let me introduce Markus Groth to deliver the lecture this afternoon. Thank you very much, Markus.
Les was saying to me upstairs, I hope your kids are not going to fall asleep during the lecture. To which I said, if they do, this is going to be my new bedtime lecture that I'm going to repeat every night from now on and pull out the PowerPoint slides. This lecture series is certainly a great opportunity, I think, to showcase some of the research that's going on at UNSW. I have to say it's quite a challenge, though, to present to such a diverse audience, many or even the majority of people probably not even from the business school. I think we're academics are so used to just present to our peers and go to conferences and speak in jargon to each other and try to impress each other with filling up slides with as many bullet points and numbers as we can. So I'm going to try not to do that as much as I can and try to make it interesting for everyone. I think my topic, fortunately, sort of lends itself to that slightly easier than maybe some others, because customer service is something that really anybody can relate to. Most of you are probably working in a job or have worked in a job where you have direct contact with customers, or at least know some other people who, or observe other people who do. On the flip side of it, all of us are customers hundreds of times each week, so we know both sides of the story, and hopefully some of the concepts and some of the findings that I'm going to speak to will relate to you personally. So the brief for this talk was not to just talk about the latest research project or paper, but a bit more broadly about, the research in general that I've done, where I came from, or how I ended up to where I am. So I thought it's only fitting to sort of reflect a bit, asking myself, why customer? Why customer service? How did I even get started on this topic? And I'm hugely passionate about this topic. I've worked in it for nearly 20 years now. But after much reflection, the answer to that is I actually don't know for sure why I'm so interested in. I think there's sort of two influences that probably stand out. And one of them is just the people that crossed my path fairly early on in my academic career. When I joined the University of Arizona PhD program, I didn't really have a research topic, which is very common in the US, unlike in Australia, that you don't necessarily know right away what you're going to do. And very early on, here are three people that I immediately crossed paths with, and they had a huge impact on me subsequently. Stephen Gilliland and Barbara Gutak, both for management, and then Sid Levy for marketing. None of them were really an expert in customer service, but they were all getting at that topic from one angle or another. And they ended up being on my dissertation committee and having really quite a huge impact on me in very formative years early on in my academic career. Barbara Gutak in 95, just shortly before I joined, had just published a book, The Dynamics of Service, and I read that book like other people read what's the guy's name? Dan Brown? No. A Harry Potter novel where I just couldn't put it down, and it was so intriguing, the sort of research question that it raised, what we knew, but more importantly, what we didn't know. So I think that sort of certainly laid the groundwork, and I sort of never stopped since then. Secondly, I think an influence is just my personal history in terms of where I'm from. I was born and raised in Germany, and as probably all of you know, we're Germans are known for a lot of things, like our beer, our engineers, our cars. Also, we've sort of taken a bit of a hit in that very lately. Our soccer team, obviously. But one thing that we're not necessarily known for, doesn't come to your mind when you hear Germany, first of all, is friendly people. That's not the first association that people have. And it's not really a service mentality, so to speak. And it's certainly what I experienced growing up as well. This is not a picture of Germany, but Herbert Simon is a very well-known and respected management scholar in Germany. And in the mid-90s, 95 I think it was, he gave an interview at the Spiegel, and he coined a term that people have picked up on ever since and still use up to that day. And he said Germany is really a service desert, meaning it's completely underdeveloped and a lack of focus on really the importance of service. And that certainly improved a little bit, but to some extent we're still there. That's certainly watching that myself, and then coming to the US to start my studies there was a bit of a culture shock, seeing how friendly people are, but to some extent also over the top friendly, and having the culture comparison I think really got me interested in it. Now incidentally, actually, as I was going to the US, Walmart was going the other way, and in 96 or 97 they decided to expand to Germany. Big angst at that time. People were in the press were thinking, oh, the big US retailer is going to come in and crush the competition. And they actually didn't do very well. They really struggled for many years, and after 8 or 9 years, they finally, I think 2006, they finally pulled the plug. And those things, it's never an easy explanation of why it is that they didn't succeed. Certainly always a very complex problem and lots of moving parts. But if you read some of the analysis, a lot of people always came back to that. They didn't really understand the cultural differences in terms of customer service. So they're expecting their employees to be really friendly and smiling all the time. And Germans are actually not used to that culturally, to have complete strangers smile at you. the typical American having a greeter at the front that just says hi. They found that very weird and couldn't quite grasp that concept. Employees, on the other hand, also felt quite uncomfortable being asked to smile all the time, and that made them really uncomfortable when it showed to customers who felt it was not really sincere. So watching all those things play out really made me realize that there are a lot of nuances there, and in terms of the cultural comparisons as well. I think that's what really got me hooked. Now, why emotions, on the other hand, and linking that to customer service? To answer that question, I've reflected on that a little bit as well. A very quick historical perspective, and I'll promise I'll make it quick because I don't want to give a history lesson on a Friday afternoon before a long weekend. But OB, my discipline, organizational behavior, which is human behavior in an organizational setting, actually, it's a very young discipline by many standards. It probably sort of evolved in the 40s, 50s, so it's 80 years old or less. And it's really just the composition of other disciplines, psychology predominantly, but also sociology, political science, operations management a little bit. Psychology, clearly the dominant one, but even psychology by many standards is a fairly young discipline. So if you sort of look at the timeline, it started to evolve as a discipline really in the 1880s, 1890s, when it sort of broke away from philosophy. And this guy you'll know, maybe not by picture, but by name, Sigmund Freud, who had a huge impact on putting psychology on the map, with psychoanalysis and various other things. And, you got to give him credit for what he did. Actually, sort of turns out that a lot of predictions weren't necessarily true, and a lot of things were not really testable or verifiable in a scientific way. So sort of as a backlash to that, over the years, you come to the 40s, 50s especially, there was a very strong counter movement to that called behaviorism, where people said because psychology was sort of regarded as a second-class discipline, you're too soft and it's not really science. So there's a clearly move towards let's just measure what we can observe, and everything that people feel and think, and we can actually measure that, let's forget about that. And for quite a while there was such a strong drive that things like emotions and cognitions and things like that sort of totally fell to the wayside. But eventually, if we move on in the timeline, in the 1960s, cognitive psychology slowly evolved where people were saying, well, actually maybe it does pay off to sort of think about what it is that's going on in somebody's head that we can't as easily measure as somebody pressing a button or more observable behaviors. And then roughly in terms of the 1990s, that's when what has been termed the affective revolution was started. So all of a sudden there was a huge impetus on looking at emotions as a very valid sort of topic of area in terms of psychology and in terms of organizational behavior. And if you look at the timeline, that's sort of, shortly after that, it started in the mid-90s or so. That was exactly the time when I joined the PhD program. I have to say, it wasn't really apparent to me that I was in the middle of a revolution. I think that term actually hadn't been used until 2003 the first time, but now every paper on it has started with, well, we're in the affective revolution. But all of a sudden, people were discovering, actually emotions matter quite a bit in the workplace, and not everything that we do is rational. In terms of leadership, emotions play a huge impact on how effective leaders are. Emotions play a huge impact in terms of team effectiveness and how teams relate to each other, and all sorts of other facets of business. So here we are. I've sort of, unwittingly, I think there was so much emotions research around me as I was starting as an academic that it just felt natural sort of to apply a lot of that to the service context. And if you think about the link to services, it's a very natural anyway. Here just to put the affective revolution a bit in context in terms of citations for emotional labor, which is one particular topic that I research and I'll talk about later. You can see how academic citations were pretty flat, and it was pretty much on the fringes, and then in the middle of 90s it suddenly picked up and skyrocketed, and when I update this at the end of the year, we'll probably be twice as high again. So the link between emotions and services, now marketing has already figured that out way before us. I have to say that, in terms of the customer experience, it's not just about the very rational, predictable facets of it, but a lot of it has to do with how customers actually feel intuitively. So the service experience is as much the key of the customer experience that is about any observable and measurable facets of products or services. One framework in marketing says that, in terms of the products and services, it's really sort of a continuum, but we can think of it in different categories. That on one side, we have ones that are very high in search qualities. What that means is that we as customers or consumers, we can evaluate quite easily the quality of a product or service beforehand. So if I go and buy a banana, I can look at the banana and I have a pretty good idea whether or not that's good quality or not. But sort of in the middle of it, and we have a lot of those, are services that have a lot more experience qualities. So these are things that I may not be able to judge them before, but during or even after the service delivery, I get a pretty good idea of what it is. If I go to a movie or a symphony or concert or something, I don't know what to expect before, but afterwards you can ask me and I can tell you, whether or not I'm satisfied or not. But then on the right side of this continuum here, you have a lot of services with what's called credence values, and they're sort of increasing in modern times more and more. And those are types of services that you can't really easily evaluate and judge as a consumer before or during or even after the service delivery, because a lot of times we just don't have the knowledge and the skills to do that effectively. So if I go and have my car repaired, or if I get some legal advice or accounting advice, I don't know if they've given me good legal advice or not, or if my accountant has done a good job. I got some money back, but I have no sense of whether or not I could have gotten more, or whether or not that was really a good job. So all of those are so fuzzy for us consumers that what we really only have to go by is the experience. So we tend to judge the service delivery not by the quality of the service really, but more by the delivery. Were people friendly to me? Were they dressed professionally? And were they nice? Were they smiling, et cetera, et cetera. So that right end of the spectrum here is a lot of where my research plays out, because that's where the emotional aspect really becomes so crucial. Now I'm going to introduce 3 principles from the emotions literature. There's a lot more, and I use a lot more in my research, but there's only so much time here. So, 3 that sort of are very interconnected, but that really play a vital role in my research. And number 1 is the concept of emotional contagion. So the idea that emotions can be transferred amongst people. That has been shown in social psychology for quite a while already. Sort of like we catch a cold, or a yawn is contagious. You see other people yawn, and all of a sudden you feel like yawning too. The same principle that people around you are happy or sad or have certain emotions, and they actually rub off on each other, and we know that in various settings that emotions transpire that way. So the transfer of emotions from one place to from one person to the other. A second concept, and I'm sure a lot of you will heard about that, is called emotional intelligence. That has been quite prevalent in the popular literature as well. That started with a book that was published by Daniel Goldman, also in 95, so in that same period that I was talking about. And I picked it up and read it even before I started my PhD, and absolutely loved that book. And it was the idea that it's not just about the cognitive intelligence, but actually the emotional intelligence, the way we're able to read and understand our own emotions and the emotions of others. That's really a crucial life skill. And Goldman made some quite bold claims that he didn't really, they don't necessarily hold up, that it's more important than IQ. But nevertheless, the research shows that yes, emotional intelligence is a very, very important predictor of a lot of outcomes, workplace related and non-workplace related. There's sort of 4 facets that most people agree with in emotional intelligence. So the self-awareness, understanding my own emotions; the social awareness, understanding the emotions of others, being able to read that in whatever context; the self-regulation, so even if I feel my emotions, being able to deal with them effectively, and that's one aspect I'm going to talk about very specifically in my research; and then the use of emotion for whatever strategic purposes to make use of that. So my research is really focused on all of these in one way or the other, but today I'm going to focus primarily on the self-regulation aspect. That actually comes back, and Goldman talks about that in his book as well, to the marshmallow test, and some of you may have heard this. So this is how it actually started, where they did a lot of these studies where they got 4-year-olds and put them in a room just like this, you see here, and they said, I'll give you 1 marshmallow right now, but if you're going to wait 10 minutes or 20 minutes, I'm going to give you 3 marshmallows. And then they wanted to see our kids in this case, able to regulate their emotions, their urge to, I want the small reward right now, or am I going to be able to wait and then wait for a bigger one later on? It's actually quite difficult at that age, and about only 30% of 4-year-olds are able to do that. But Michel, who's a psychologist who did these studies originally, he actually tracked these kids, again visited them at age 12, and found that the ones that were able to self-regulate their emotions were better on a number of measures. They had better self-awareness, they had better scores in school, they had higher scores on standardized tests. They were less frustrated, better emotional outcomes on a number of reasons. He actually kept following them throughout their life, and he just wrote another book about them last year, I think it was, which I haven't read, but I'm going to do that soon, and probably found some other interesting effects there as well. So this self-regulation aspect really plays an important role. One current sidetrack on a popular news topic. So our fairly new Prime Minister, in one of his first interviews after leadership spill, September 22nd this year, said in his first ABC interview, he's going to lead with emotional intelligence. So obviously that's something that politicians aspire to as well. The third concept of emotions is what's called emotional labor. And that is a concept that was initially introduced by a sociologist. Her name was Ali Hochschild, and she wrote this book, The Managed Heart, in which she basically reported on some studies that she'd done, some qualitative work, and described how we seem to focus in the workplace a lot on just the cognitive aspects of it or the physical aspects, but we neglect the emotional part of it. She said the emotional part is really important in predicting to what extent employees are positively or negatively affected by the outcomes, whether or not that really affects their work, et cetera, et cetera. So this idea that you have to constantly display certain emotions, you have to be friendly in certain emotions, suppress others, that takes a toll day after day on people, and especially over time, and in certain industries and certain jobs, it leads to a lot of burnout and a lot of negative consequences for employees. So that was her basic premise. So the idea is really that service with a smile, if you want to put it in simple English, what she's trying to say. So what she's saying is that there are a lot of what we call display rules, organizational display rules. So organizations have sometimes explicit, but sometimes also very implicit rules about this is how we expect you to behave. In certain domains we found, healthcare, for example, or accounting, it's not really the organizations necessarily telling people you can't do this or you can't do that, but you talk to people and they say, well, I got to do this because this is what nurses do, and they have sort of professional identity in the first place, and feel it's not appropriate to show certain emotions in certain circumstances, etc. Other times it's very explicit. Here, I took a picture of this on a recent visit to Hong Kong, where at a Pizza Hut they said, service is a smile. You'd be greeted with a warm smile and friendly greeting from our service staff. If not, your next personal pan pizza is on us. So very explicit also towards the customers that, here, these are our rules. You can know that as well, and our employees better smile. Whether or not that's effective or not is another question. This one was spotted at a McDonald's in New York, which says, if we don't smile before you pay, you get a free small French fries or hash brown on your next visit. Please try to catch us. So here it couldn't be more obvious and explicit what the display rule is. Those are actually very simple ones, but others like Boost Juice, for example, an Adelaide-based chain which you have here on campus as well, has quite elaborate display rules as well, not necessarily posted for customers, but for employees, about the high energy and vibrancy that they want their employees to display. Pratt & Manager, it's a UK-based fast food chain, and they have these sort of 3 categories, very detailed, descriptive, things that we don't want to see, that we want to see in the perfect. And then in that last category, I have these things like, don't be moody, and create a sense of fun, happy to be yourself, be genuinely happy, however you can accomplish that. So here are some rules of, clearly very elaborate display rules, and in response to that is when employees need to regulate their emotions. Now, how do they do that? There are a lot of different ways to regulate emotions, a lot of strategies. There's sort of 2 umbrella categories, and I'm only going to talk about them today. Also, in reality, it's a lot more nuanced, and we have looked at lots of different strategies in my own research and others. But the 2 main strategies are really, one of them is we call surface acting. So that is basically just changing the expression, not the actual feelings, but changing the expression, just faking emotions, just being happy, even if you want to punch a customer in the face or whatever, just fainting, just suppressing anger, etc., etc. I can try to give you a definition here, but there's nobody better who says it, what surface acting is, than one of the great thinkers of our modern generation, and that is Princess Elsa from the movie Frozen. She says, or she sings as a matter of fact, don't let them in, don't let them see, be the good girl you always have to be, conceal, don't feel, don't let them know. So sort of a perfect example of, this is just changing the expressions, but not actually how you feel. On the other hand, you have what you call deep acting, and that is actually changing your feelings. So rather than just the expression, changing the feelings of, how at least temporary, how we feel in order to meet the demands of a particular situation. Hochschild in her work talked a lot about airline employees, for example, how, they are trained how to respond to unruly airline passengers by, putting themselves in the shoes of them, or pretending that, they are first-time flyers and they're just scared, or they're little kids or something like that, in order to change your perception of it. So it's a lot of, putting yourself in the shoes of the other person, changing your perspective. A lot of that is really the basis of what you see in sales and in a lot of other professions as well, what's called empathy training, where they really try to teach you to do that effectively. So those are the 2 things, those are the 2 strategies of how to deal with these. Now, my research is sort of all over this place, I guess, in this space, but I tried to sort of summarize it in 3 main questions that I asked, and that sort of have a theme that run through my research. And one of them is, what are the effects on employees of this? And at the danger of, summarizing a very complex body of literature and a very nuanced body of literature in a simple slide, let me say that generally speaking, surface acting is bad for employees in terms of negative outcomes. Deep acting has a much more positive effect, or sometimes at least a neutral effect. So for example, if you look at low engagement and satisfaction, they'd see that surface acting there performs worst. Burnout is a common outcome that we see. Increased stress and various other health symptoms or related issues. Lower job performance. In one study, I was actually able to look at the actual performances rated by employees. Found that, it's predictable. Surface acting led to lower performance of employees. Deep acting led to higher performance. Higher turnover. Same thing in one studies in the call center, we're able to survey employees and then go back in 9 months later and actually see who was still in their jobs and who had left the organization. And we found that it's predictable, surface acting, controlling for everything else was a pretty good predictor of people leaving the job. Now here we're actually able to quantify it, and then there was a 3% increase per standard deviation higher turnover. That doesn't sound like a lot, but if you think about the standard deviation in this case was probably half a point on a 5-point scale. That's an enormous implication it can have for a very large organization. Absenteeism, same effect. In another study, and this was in a hospital, we found that people who were surface acting more were more absent from their job. And in this case, normally sort of absenteeism gets absorbed by other people around you who just pick up the work, and you never really know what it has in terms of the impact. But in this case, because it was a large public hospital, that's not too far from here actually, and because of regulations, if one nurse is absent, they actually have to be replaced by somebody else. So you're very easily be able to keep track, and that's what we were able to do for the hospital, to see what the actual cost was of surface acting, for example. And then we found that it was $1,400 per employee per year. Again, in a large organization, that can be, in quite incredible effect. So the next question then, after it's become pretty clear that we have these are the effects of emotional labor, the next question is then why? And I guess I'm not the only researcher who ever asked that question, probably a lot of others have. But why is it that we see these effects? Because if we understand the mechanisms a little better, then we're probably able to at least do something about it, or predict boundary conditions, etc. And I'm really only going to very briefly touch this quite big body of research that others have been doing, and I've been involved in for quite a while. But it's basically, as Hochschild has predicted, there are different resources, like cognitive and emotional resources, and this emotional work is draining, and it's sort of like a tank of a car, so to speak, and you're slowly draining it, and each time you're taking a bit out, and eventually it's empty, and then you're running on empty. That's how it basically unfolds. So, there's a limited pool of resources, and engaging in surface acting takes more resources than, for example, deep acting, and that drains people slowly, and then the tank gets emptier and emptier. It's actually very hard to measure these things, but with two colleagues who are sitting in the audience here, I've gotten a lot into experience sampling methods recently over the last few years. What that basically means is, rather than the more traditional way that we do in organizational research of just giving people employees in organizations and serving them one time a year and saying, oh, satisfaction is related to this or that, experience sampling method means that we sample people a lot of times, very often, multiple times a day over a certain period of time, and then we're able to track their progress and track certain effects of what happens during the beginning of the day versus the end of the day, etc. These are very short surveys because if each time you need to answer a few questions, you pretty quickly get tired of it, but it allows to analyze some quite powerful data because you can see lots of changes within the same person that you can otherwise not see when you're just comparing across people. So here in this case, for example, we had 68 nurses, and that's sort of a common sample size for research like that, and we gave them 3 daily surveys over 10 days, and that resulted in 2,000 data points. So we gave them iPods basically, and iPods, at random times that we programmed, they would pop up and say, please fill out this survey. It was a few questions. They quickly did that, put it back in the pocket. Everything was time-stamped. We could see when and who filled it out, etc. And then we're able to pull out that data at the end and analyze those 2,000 data points. The result of that is that, just as we predicted in a way, that in terms of the regulation strategy that you choose up front, it really had an impact on their resource level already by the middle of the day, and that really impacted their well-being at the end. So people were more exhausted at the end. Things like surface acting, for example, had a clear effect here that it just drained employees much more than other strategies. What can you do about that? One interesting line of research is, as simple as it sounds, is taking simple breaks. As we know from very cognitive tasks or physical tasks, where just taking a break really helps out. Same with the emotional aspect of it, in terms of replenishing those resources. If you just let people take 5-minute breaks sometimes and regroup, it really spikes up the energy level quite a bit. Actually, one of the call centers that I was working with, they took that really to heart, and they created a room in the back where they basically had a punching bag, and then people, when they're just so frustrated coming off the phone with the customer, they could take a quick timeout. They go in that room, they close the door, they do whatever they need to do for a minute, and they walk out. And even simple things like this, you don't necessarily have to take a violent break. You can just close your eyes and, relax like this guy. But that basically has quite a powerful impact. Also, we found that self-efficacy, so belief that you can do that, a particular task, so surface acting, deep acting, also has a powerful effect on how much it does or does not impact resource level. So in order to, increasing people's ability and belief in their ability that they can do well in one strategy or the other, is quite helpful. Here we had a study, which is not yet published, where we're able to track nurses over a period of 6 years, actually. And we closely monitored their use of surface acting, deep acting, and the very self-efficacy, how it built up over time. And sure enough, there was a very intricate relationship there that, as use and self-efficacy increases, it really had a reciprocal relationship, and it helped people to reduce their resource input. We're also able to relate that to performance and burnout at the end, so it even has some very quantifiable work outcomes as well. So the last question that goes to my stream of research is, well, what about the customer? Because I've talked a lot about the employee side now, how it has good and not so good impact on employees. But what about the customer when they see somebody's clearly faking, or if they think they're faking, and do they care, et cetera, et cetera? Those are questions that really started to intrigue me. In one of probably my most favorite studies that I did, because it was a field experiment and you don't get to do them very often and they're very resource intensive, but with a colleague in overseas, we're able to piggyback on a project that was going on. He was a professor in media arts, and for a big cohort of his students, they had this semester-long project where they actually had to build out and fit out a movie store. And they got sponsored by some of the movie companies, and they had tons and tons of DVDs that they dropped off, etc. So, we collaborated with them and created this video rental. But we then hired actors who were the employees, who were going to be the employees. We trained them over a period of 6 weeks quite intensively in terms of the service behaviors, but also in terms of surface acting, deep acting, so that they would behave absolutely identical, except in terms of two things that we manipulated. And those were the amount of smiling and the authenticity of smiling. So we randomized that people actually either smiled a lot or didn't smile a lot, or that they, what I call authenticity here is that they engaged in surface acting or deep acting. Customers then came through the door. We gave them a survey. We said, tell us a few things. And we asked about what are your favorite movies and movie stars, and mostly filler, and a few questions about how are you feeling right now. And then they were randomly assigned to one of the employees, and as they walked out again, we asked them again, lots of questions, and how are you feeling right now? So we're able to actually look at the before-after emotions, which normally you don't have the luxury in the field to do that. So here we had customer emotions, and of course on the way out, we also asked them, how satisfied are you? Do you have rapport with a person, et cetera, et cetera. So the findings are that, and there are lots of findings. I'm really only focusing on one of the most interesting here, is that in the before scenario, you had sort of everybody on an equal level, as you would expect, because we randomly assigned people, and everybody was, in terms of the emotion, the change of emotions about, 3 point something on the scale. But then you can see that there was a bit of a bump for the amount of smiling, but actually that was not significant, but the authenticity had a huge jump. So here we clearly saw an impact, which is quite a powerful finding, really, and it really showed that it wasn't necessarily the amount of smiling, the quantity of smiling, but it was the quality of smiling that really mattered. So that really sort of goes against some of the earlier slides that I showed about, McDonald's and saying, you need to smile, and the customer obviously knows it's fake, et cetera, et cetera. So we see that, okay, it may have a little bit of a bump, but the authenticity of smiles is what drives us much more than the quantity of it. And I guess partly you could see that in the Walmart example as well that I mentioned earlier. To follow up on that, I used a research method that I used a few times because it's really fun, but generates quite some interesting data, where send people out to lots of different services, cafes, restaurants, dry cleaners, whatever it is. And basically, a customer and an employee will interact with each other, and it's immediately after their interaction, we quickly survey the customer and we quickly survey the employee separately, without them really knowing beforehand. And then later on, we're able to match those together. So obviously, you have to be very quick in those things. There may be a next customer waiting already, so you only ask a few questions to the employee. but we asked them specifically, in plain English, we said, well, with the customer that you just served, did you just pretend or was that real? Or, was it authentic or not? And then we asked the customer the same questions. Do you think that person just faked it or was that real? And we asked them, and how much did you like the interaction and how satisfied are you, et cetera, et cetera. So the first question there was, well, are we even going to see a link there? And I wasn't so sure at all starting this because the literature in social psychology actually showed that people are not particularly good in detecting emotions. And that's a lot of times in the lab where you have no distractions and you can focus on the task. And here you have a messy real-life environment where people may not have even paid attention to the facial expressions or had kids next to them and were distracted. So are we even going to see whether or not people picked it up? And the answer is yes. We ran some very, very complicated accuracy predictions in a paper, but you can really boil it down to a simple number of about almost 2/3 people, yes, were able to detect whether or not people were faking or not, which you could do by 50% anyway, but it's a statistically significant difference. So there's a lot of error, and some people don't necessarily, but by and large, people are able to pick up whether people are authentic or not. And most of these were reasonably short interactions, so if you're somewhere, at a hairdresser for 20 or 30 minutes, obviously, the likelihood becomes much longer. In terms of the other facts, it was then reasonably predictable in a way that showed, yes, deep acting had, positive effects on the service quality of these customers, customer orientation, where surface acting had negative. So we sort of replicated what we find for the employee side of it, that also for the customer, they don't really seem to enjoy the surface acting that much, but deep acting, the authenticity, has a much more impactful outcome. Okay, that's not the end of the road, but the end of the talk, and I see that I'm almost out of time. The story certainly doesn't end there, and there are lots of other topics that I'm looking at the moment. In terms of training, we've just collected some data about how we train people to perform certain emotion regulation strategies in the healthcare context. Socialization with one of my students, who I think I saw somewhere in the audience, but I'm not sure if she's here right now, where we really want to track people from day one that they start an organization, say, how do you actually learn those display rules and how quickly do you pick them up and what sort of impact does it have over the coming days and weeks and months, etc. The type of display rules that I talked about earlier in the various examples, we're teasing that apart, customer behaviors, other boundary conditions always, the dynamics in an interaction. We really start to look at how certain strategies change within a simple interaction, etc., etc. All right, with that, let me just conclude that what really still even now attracts me to this area of research, that it's quite a complicated thing and it's not a simple answer in that, well, it's good or bad. Because if you look at these two things, what these sort of prescriptions of a service smile do, they are good for the service side. And we know everything else being equal, customers like to have good service, and that's a competitive advantage for organizations. So yes, it does pay off for the organization. At the same time, there's pretty clear evidence that on the employee side, it has negative consequences under certain circumstances and for certain strategies. So it really becomes a balancing act, saying, well, we need to make sure that we balance it right, that whatever the cost on one side is at least paid off by the benefit that we get on the other side. And where we don't get benefit for the organization, we ought to cut it down for the employee side, that we don't put them under unnecessary strain and lower their performance and their turnover, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I just want to thank three special people that Les already mentioned in this introduction. My beautiful wife, Vanessa, who's sitting here, and I think everybody who knows her agrees that she has the most beautiful smile of all. And then my two sons, Lucas and Oliver. At least Lucas managed to stay here for the whole duration, which is fantastic. That's you on there, yeah. And obviously they have beautiful smiles as well, but even more importantly, they're both too young still to realize the social conventions about faking smiles. And every smile from them is 100% authentic at this moment, and I'm going to enjoy that for as much as I can. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Chris Stiles, and it's my great privilege to be the Dean of UNSW Business School. And one of the great privileges is working with people like Markus and being at an occasion like today, where we're recognising and celebrating the great work that he's done. So what I'd firstly like to do is welcome you all from my behalf, and particularly the family. There is a lot to be proud of, and I'm sure you are, and a lot to smile about, which you are. And your children have been absolute model lecture goers. One fell asleep and one was nice and quiet. So welcome. There are two big takeouts from me from what you've been talking about. The first is that I'm going to stop smiling and revert to my grumpy, authentic self. And the second thing is I'm going to buy a punching bag for my office. But reflecting on what you did say, I think there's probably three quick observations I'd like to make about your work. The first is I understand it. And I guess I should understand all the research that's done in the business school, but it's not because your research is simple or simplistic. A lot of it is because of the way that you communicate it. And I think, as academics, we can take that as a model. There was only about 3 numbers on there, but they were really big, so I understood them. But I think the way in which you communicated your ideas is a great asset, and that's fantastic. Secondly, you do take on real business problems that really matter, and then use very rigorous academic methods and approaches to solve them. And I know that they're real business problems and big issues because a lot of external organisations give you funding for your research, they participate in your research, and they make changes based on your research. And I know that firsthand because the large hospital that you've been doing research with, last time I was there, didn't give me one single smile. Although it's probably because I walked in with a broken wrist and a dislocated arm, and I wasn't doing much smiling myself. But it is about making research real and having an impact. And in terms of the rigorous part, I had the good privilege of reading some of the referees for Markus' promotion last year, and there's no doubt about the standing of his work amongst his peers globally. The third thing is that you tell people about it. So often, some academics criticise for being in ivory towers. At UNSW, we tend to not be like that. But I think Markus is a very good example of that, whether it's communicating through the Sydney Morning Herald, industry reports or industry conferences. It's very important that we have impact in terms of the research we do, and you really have done that. So there is much to smile about in terms of your work. I think, as I said, I think your family, but also your colleagues and friends who are here today now probably have a great appreciation of the work you've done, and the impact you've had, and that you will have. So all I'd like to do is wish you very well for the next phase of your research career, and ask you all to thank once again Markus for his talk today.
What a fantastic lecture, and another one in the series of these inaugural professorial lectures. I think I've said it before that the enormous spread of excellent research that we do across the university, getting people to come up and talk about their research is not something that you don't have to stop them doing it. Once they get up here, the passion that they exude about the subject that they've been studying, sometimes for a lifetime, but they choose to study is just phenomenal. And the way that we do actually communicate it and spread it around UNSW, I think, has made this series of professorial lectures the success that it's been. Thank you again, Markus. What a fantastic lecture this evening.